Well, it's good to see everybody out this evening. I appreciate you being here. You're an encouragement to me. And hopefully the things we talk about will be beneficial to all of us. Mark texted me earlier this afternoon and asked me what the lesson would be about because he's leading singing. And I told him we'd be talking about gluttony. There's not a lot of songs in our book that talk about gluttony. And so that's a pretty tough challenge, but I appreciate Mark leading us in those songs before we get into our study. Someone asked me to talk about this topic, and I think it's a biblical subject. And so we'll try to talk about understanding gluttony. I'll say up front, we're not going to cover every aspect of the topic, but I think we can get a good foundation maybe to try to understand it and then apply it to our lives. That's always the goal. If you're like me, whenever you think about this topic or this word, gluttony, actually the first thing I thought about was maybe some wrong concepts of it. And what I'm talking about is, the Catholic Church has this doctrine of the 7 deadly sins. And one of those 7 deadly sins is gluttony. There's several, obviously 7 on that list, and I think some of them are biblical subjects, but that's not found in the Bible. I guess the closest thing would be in Proverbs 6. There's 7 things that God hates, but that doesn't line up with that list. But they've got this doctrine of these 7 deadly sins, and gluttony is on that list. I've got a quote, I didn't put it on the slide, but there's a quote from a Catholic bishop, I think. His name's Joseph Rickabley. And he defined in the Catholic Encyclopedia gluttony as eating, quote, too soon, too expensively, too much, too eagerly, and too daintily. And so they've really lined out rules for gluttony and what that looks like. But again, in the final analysis, no one sin is more important or more deadly than another. All sin results in death. And so, this idea of 7 deadly sins might have been the first thing I thought of, but that's not biblical. That's a Catholic doctrine. But gluttony is talked about in the Bible. Not a lot, but it is talked about. And so I think the best place to start is just trying to define what gluttony is. And so we'll try to do that as we dive into our study. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew word is zalal, and it means to be worthless, to be light, to be gluttonous, to be vile, and that's what is translated to the English word glutton or gluttony, the variation of that word in our Old Testaments in English. And so it just means someone that's morally loose or has no restraint, and so that's to be gluttonous. In the New Testament, there's a couple words. There's a Greek word pronounced phagos, and that's from the root word phago, to eat or to be gluttonous. And so the root word is to eat, right? And then to do too much in that would cause you to be gluttonous. And so that word is found in the New Testament. We'll look at verse in just a minute, but coincidentally, if you read from the King James Version, the word glutton is only found twice in your New Testament. Double check me on that. And Jesus used it both times. If you're reading the newer translation, there's another word that's used, and we'll look at this verse. It's another Greek word here. I think you pronounce it gaster, and it means stomach, belly, or womb. And so you would use that Greek word. But in some English translations, that's pronounced as, or translated as glutton or gluttony. So let's look at a couple examples of those. In Proverbs 23, beginning at verse 20, this is that Hebrew word zalal we were talking about is used here, or a variant of it. It says, "Do not be with heavy drinkers of wine or with gluttonous eaters of meat, for the heavy drinker and the glutton will come to poverty, and drowsiness will clothe one with rags." And so here's a person, remember we said it was somebody that had no moral restraint. So here's a person that has no restraint with his appetite, and so he's going to become poor. He'll be lazy. The glutton here is also associated with the drinker, which is kind of interesting. And so poverty, drowsiness, and clothes being rags are mentioned as all part of this person's life. That's not really a pretty picture that's described here. And so you think about a person that has no moral restraint, and then they start drinking alcohol. Well, I mean, it's their whole life is going to be a wreck. And so he would be drinking to excess, not having any self-control would be evident. And so these things sort of go together. This idea of having no restraint as far as eating goes, but also as far as drinking, they're tied together here. And so this person is doing harm to themselves because they've got no restraint. Let's look at one of the New Testament examples we talked about. I said twice the word is used in the New Testament. Jesus, if you're reading the King James Version, Jesus used it both times. So in Matthew 11, Jesus was talking to a crowd of people, and he was talking to them about John the Baptist. John the Baptist is a good man. He was teaching, and right before this verse, he had said, John came neither eating or drinking, and people were saying of John, well, he has a demon. Something's off with him. And then Jesus is saying the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a gluttonous man and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. And so Jesus said, this is what's being saying about me. I'm a gluttonous man and a drunkard. That's what people were saying about me, Jesus said. And so those that were enemies of Jesus were making a charge of sinfulness toward him, and they're falsely accusing him of being a gluttonous man and a drunkard. It's interesting that those two are tied together. Again, they're sort of like cousins, I guess. They kind of go together, being a glutton and a drunkard because of lack of restraint. The other time that I don't have on the screen is in Luke's account in Luke 7 and verse 34. It's the same situation. Jesus is talking about John, and it's almost verbatim, word for word, as what's said here in Matthew 11. Pretty much the same words are used. And so those two times in the New Testament it's used by Jesus saying that people were accusing him of being a gluttonous man. Now in Titus 1 and verse 12, here's where, if you're reading a different version, you'll have another usage of the word glutton. The New American Standard in Titus 1 and verse 12, and others, not just New American Standard, but that's the one I chose. It says, one of themselves, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. So Paul was writing to Titus. He was talking about the people of Crete, and he quoted one of their own poets and said this about themselves. They're always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. The King James Version says, even a prophet of their own said, the Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. So the King James Version uses slow bellies there. And so it's really interesting that anytime it's used, it's always coupled with other things. So they're liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. And that's not a great list. And so the question comes up then, well, is it a sin then to be gluttonous? Is gluttony a sin? And if it is a sin, we need to know about it. We need to avoid doing whatever it is that the Lord doesn't approve of. I think it's interesting that I said that it always goes with other words. You would tell your teenage kids, be careful who you run around with. Be careful who you keep company with. Well, just looking at the word glutton as we've looked at it, it's always keeping company with other words that are bad. And that really drives the point home. Is being a glutton bad? Well, it's always associated with a lot of other bad things and lists like this. And so if the word keeps bad company in the passages where it's used, that tells me that should be the first indicator. Well, it's not something that's great. And so having looked at that, kind of defining it, looking at a couple of things, let's dive in and try to make some points here. As far as understanding gluttony, let's just begin talking about using restraint when eating. We said that gluttony has a meaning of lack of moral restraint, lack of self-control. In Proverbs 25, and verse 16 and verse 27, a couple interesting proverbs says, "Has you found honey? Eat only what you need, that you not have it in excess and vomit it." That's pretty, that's a word picture there. But if you got some food, if you got some honey, eat what you need. That's a proverbial truth, if I can say it. Eat what you need, not in excess. Verse 27 of Proverbs 25 says, "It is not good to eat much honey, nor is it glory to search out one's own glory." So it's not a good thing to eat too much, the proverb writer says. But I want to make the point here that these applications, I'm not just talking about, when I go home, if I have a piece of chocolate cake, am I doing wrong? This is a wide application here. Do I have self-control in all facets of my life? And so, if you're thinking, man, I ate a piece of cake after lunch today. Okay, I mean, that could be wrong, but this is a broad application. If you're lacking self-control and your appetite for whatever it is for fleshly things is guiding your whole life, then you may be in trouble. And I think that's what we'll see as we keep developing this point. One of the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, verse 22 says, "The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. against such things there is no law. I can't hardly read that without singing the song. You know, the kids sing a song about the fruit of the Spirit. But included in the fruit of the Spirit is self-control. And we could list a number of things. So what do you lack self-control about? I mean, there's a lot of things. There's people that get in bad habits like watching pornography. They lack self-control. There's people that get in bad habits of doing drugs. They lack self-control and they can't stop. There's all kinds of bad habits. I mean, we can get in bad habits of using bad language, lacking self-control. And so as we're thinking about this idea, all of this, the fruit of the Spirit, including self-control and using restraint, whether it's eating or whatever we're doing, that could cause us trouble. And so understanding gluttony is we've got to be in control and not just chasing whatever desires that we have. In the second place, let's talk about just lacking restraint in other ways and kind of see what we can learn. There's broader applications to the word, and I think we can see that as we go through some of these verses. I'll take you to the Old Testament, to Deuteronomy 21. Let's read beginning at verse 18. It says, "If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of his city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of his city, 'This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard.' Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear of it and fear." All right, so here we've got some parents, and the charge is that their son has no restraint. Now, there's a lot of things said there, but their son has no restraint. He just does whatever he wants to do. He does as he pleases. He won't listen to their direction. And so whether that's eating or any other kind of fleshly appetite, here it mentions that he's a drunkard, and he's just not listening. So they take him to the elders of the city, and unfortunately for him, because he refuses to change his ways and establish a little self-control, it says the men of the city are going to stone him to death. And again, we don't live under the old law, but you got to ask the question, all those things that were listed there, would you suppose that God now approves of those behaviors? I mean, the law is different. There's no doubt about that. But I think I would argue, well, God still feels the same way about those behaviors. And so if a person is a glutton and a drunkard and disobeys their parents, God's not pleased with that. I think you see that in this verse here. In Proverbs 28 and verse 7, it says, "He who keeps the law is a discerning son, but he who is a companion of gluttons humiliates his father." We talked a minute ago about the company that you keep, who you make friends with. You know, who you're friends with says something about you. If you're hanging around with people that are causing trouble, well, that says something about you. So it's important what your companions are, who your companions are. But here this proverb says if you're a companion of gluttons, that's a humiliating thing to your father. Because gluttons are people that lack self-control. And so if you're spending time around them, you're going to get caught up in the things that they're caught up in. And at the very least, you're showing your approval by being with them and spending time with them. It's shameful to make friends with those that are doing wrong things, including here the proverb writer says, companion of gluttons. In 1 John 2, beginning at verse 15, we know these verses really well. But how are we tempted? What are the ways that Satan tempts us? And there's three aspects talked about here. Do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lust, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. So we know this. I mean, that's how Satan's going to tempt us. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And so included in that is the lust of the flesh. You know, and that can show itself in a lot of different ways. And the lust of the eyes. You look upon something and you lack self-control. That could be used to tempt us. And so the point we're making here is just in the New Testament, there's a condemnation of just unrestrained gratification of the flesh. We got to be in control. And so strong desires of the flesh or of the world, here it says, and so we've got to be in control of what's going on. That's going to be used to tempt us, but we can't give into it. We got to exercise self-control. All right, understanding gluttony. Let's look at a third thing. Just want to talk for a minute about society's behavior. And I don't know if that's the best way I could have made that point, but I just want to talk about how society acts. And I think before we even say anything, I think all of us have seen it. We know it. Our society just does what they want to do. I mean, if they can get their hands on something, if they got access to it, if they've got an opportunity and time, then they're going to pursue it. If it feels good, if it looks good, people are going to run toward it. That's what society is like today. Take you to 1 Peter 4 and verse 3. It's really interesting because a description of the Gentile society is given here, and it's just almost exactly what our society is like in modern day. But it says, the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. So the point here in this passage was about, now that you're a Christian, there's been enough time to do all that stuff that the Gentiles do. Now you need to live for God. I mean, that's the gist of what this passage was about, not doing all that other stuff. But all these other things that are mentioned here, this how the Gentiles act, I mean, that's just like our modern society. Pursued a course of sensuality, lust, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, abominable idolatries. I mean, that could describe America in 2025. And so we think a lot about sensuality and lust. I mean, that refers to sexual sins, and it does, but there's a broader application that we're talking about tonight. Any kind of pursuit of desire without moral restraint is going to get us in trouble. And so if you've got an unbridled appetite, if you don't keep it in check, if you lack self-control, then that's what behavior looks like. That's the society that we live in. So that makes it even more difficult. I mean, everybody else is doing these things, and we've got to show some restraint. In Philippians 3, beginning at verse 18, it says, for many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their mind on earthly things. So what a description here. Now the New King James Version says, whose God is their belly. The newer versions, New American Standard, says, whose God is their appetite. It means the same thing. If I'm driven by what I desire and I'm just full speed ahead to get that, whatever that is, then it says whose glory is their shame. Their mind is set on earthly things. That's a description of me. If my appetite, if my belly and whatever that wants, I'm going after. Paul says here that is sort of like an idol that I'm chasing. And again, that's the opposite of having self-control. And so that's what our society looks like. Our society is given over to gluttonous behavior and lack of self-control, and we can't be like that. I'll tell you, I think we need to spend a minute talking about the fact that there's joy in a life of contentment. A lot of pursuit of the things that we had just been talking about, that everybody is pursuing after, I think it'll be presented to you like it's fun, it's a good time. Chasing that thing will bring you joy, whatever it is, you fill in the blank. But the Bible tells us there's joy in a life of contentment, and that is totally opposite from how the world is doing things. The world will tell you, no, go have fun. Pursue whatever's going to make you feel good, pursue it. And forget anything else. If anybody's trying to tell you, if somebody says the Bible restricts you from that, don't listen to that. That's not fun. Go pursue fun in life. But the Bible says there's joy in a life of contentment, and I think all of us here tonight can speak to that. When we're being content with what we have, life is better because God prescribed it that way. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning of verse 12, it says, I know that there is nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good in one's lifetime. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. Enjoying life is a gift from God. There's things that we do that we enjoy. So we're going to eat, and there's going to be things we eat that we just really enjoy. There's going to be activities that we do that we just really enjoy doing. But having pleasure can't be our sole focus in life. We've got to display some contentment with the things that we have. Again, the things we have in life is a gift from God. It's okay for us to enjoy them, but that can't be our sole focus. In Proverbs 23, I like how these few verses put it. Proverbs 23 verse 1 says, "When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are a man of great appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food." That's pretty interesting. So if you're not going to be able to control yourself, you need to take measures to keep yourself in check. I think that proverb is interesting. I was thinking about that. You know, when kingdoms of old, I'm talking about earthly kingdoms obviously, of old, two kings would sit down to try to settle a war. Wouldn't it typically be done over a meal, where they would be eating and drinking? Even today, I suppose big business deals are done and made that way. And that's because when we're caught up in satisfying our desires, then we're not as cautious as we ought to be. We're going to do things that we wouldn't typically do maybe. And so the proverb here says, if you're going to sit down with a ruler, consider carefully what's before you. If you are a man of great appetite, put a knife to your throat. You need to stop that. Don't desire his delicacies. It's deceptive food. I think it's really, really interesting. If we're caught up in satisfying our desires, we may not be cautious like we ought to. In Proverbs 30, beginning of verse 8, Agur here has some good advice. I think it's really interesting. He said, "Keep deception and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is my portion, that I not be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or that I not be in want and steal and profane the name of my God." This is pretty interesting. So there's a danger in having too much, and there's a danger in having too little. If I have too much, then I may get caught up thinking, well, I don't need God. I've got everything I need. If I have too little, I may be tempted to blame God. And I think that's kind of his attitude here. So just feed me with the food that's my portion. I don't want to be full and deny you and say, "Who is the Lord?" Or be in want and steal and profane the name of God. Just give me the food that's my portion. And I think that's pretty sound advice. We don't need too little to tempt God. If we have too much, we might have a tendency to forget about God. And having said that, we live in a land of plenty. We've all got plenty. So I don't think the danger for us here tonight is having too little. I think the danger for all of us is we've probably got too much, and so we may forget God. I think that may be a challenge for us today, living in this present world. With all the challenges that we've got, we are in really blessed times. We are really prosperous, and so we've got to keep the attitude. We just want our portion. I don't want to be greedy and have too much. And I think that's really sound advice. But there's joy in a life of contentment. So is it wrong to eat food and enjoy it? Well, no. But if I'm only chasing whatever's going to bring me pleasure, then that would be wrong. That would be this gluttonous mindset that would get me in trouble because I lack self-control. Let's look at one last point. And let's just talk about the dangers of overindulgence. And really just the need for restraint. And there's a really good example, and Tom did the reading for us back there in Numbers 11. Just look at the trap that the Israelites fell into. In Numbers 11, beginning of verse 4, it says, "The rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and also the sons of Israel wept again and said, 'Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic, but now our appetite is gone. There is nothing at all to look at except this manna.'" So, you just got to think about their perspective here. God has supplied them with food that they needed. He got them out of Egypt, and now they're complaining. We used to have all this food back in Egypt. We used to eat fish free in Egypt. Now all we've got is this manna. My appetite's almost gone. I can't even stand to look at this manna anymore. This complaining that they were doing, it's a trap that they fell into because they wanted more. They had what they needed, but their sole focus was on, why can't we have some stuff that was good that we used to have? God had given them this food. All they had to do was go gather it up. It could sustain their lives, but they wanted variety. They weren't content with just manna. I skipped a few verses here. We're going to go down to verse 31 in just a second here. But basically what happened in between that was Moses, was having some interaction. And God said, well, they want meat. I'll give them meat. Basically, I'll give them so much meat that it's going to be coming out of their nose and they're going to be sick of it. And so we'll skip down to verse 31 in Numbers 11. It says, "Now there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp. and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. We'll stop right there just a minute. So this was a large camp. Yeah, I don't know exactly, maybe a couple million people. A lot of people were in this camp. And it said a day's journey on all sides. You could go however far they could go in a day. 10 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles, however far they could go in a day, a journey in all directions around the camp. There was quail 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. You know, we usually say a cubit is about 18 inches. So 2 cubits would be 36 inches or 3 feet. So can you imagine walking for miles and there's 3 feet deep of quail on top of the ground? I mean, that's hard to even picture, isn't it? But they wanted meat, and God said, well, I'll give them meat. And so he caused that to happen. Just quail everywhere. It says the people spent all day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. He who gathered the least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. Stop there for just a second. So I was doing some reading about a homer, what that would equate to. There's different measures if you look it up. If it's a liquid gallon, I read that it'd be about 58 gallons. If it's a dry gallon, so if you're packing, something dry, it'd be about 50 gallons. So we'll just take the low end and say that one homer is 50 gallons. The person that got the least amount of quail got 10 of those. So that's about what? 500 gallons of quail. I read that some commentators are suggesting that would have been 1,900 quail. You couldn't eat that much. There's no way you could eat that much. But they were so greedy, we just don't want manna. We want some meat. And so God gave them meat, and then they just overindulged. They got so much, there's no way they could eat it. And so notice it says, while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. So the name of that place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had been greedy. It's really, really interesting that they got this quail, started gathering it up, and they hadn't even finished eating it yet. It says it was still between their teeth. God's wrath showed up because they were so greedy. They were not just happy and content with what He had given them. They were greedy, and they wanted to overindulge. They showed a lack of restraint, a lack of self-control, and so He sent a plague on them. And then it's interesting that the name means that's where they buried the people who had been greedy. And so He supplied the food to them. And so you think, well, God set them up, didn't He? He brought all that quail in there. Yeah, God supplied the food, but their response to it made Him angry. And so think about that for us. I mean, we've been given a lot. Our response to what we've been given, how we deal with and handle what we've been given, is going to result in God either being pleased with us or displeased with us. I think you see that in the story here of these Israelites. And so this sin of gluttony, this wrongdoing, is about an unstrained, uncontrolled appetite, not just in food, but in any desire of the body. And so when our appetites control us, we could be, or we will be, overcome by our weaknesses. And so I think that, again, we're not going to talk about every single aspect of it, but I think that's a pretty good overview, hopefully, of gluttony and really the need for self-control. And so hopefully those points have been beneficial for you tonight. If there's anything I failed to cover, we can talk about that, or if you have questions, we can talk about that too. I think it's an important topic we want to try to understand. But really, the main takeaway is self-control and how we handle the things that we've been blessed with. I appreciate your attention tonight. Obviously, probably not a lesson that we talk about super often. And I've never put together a lesson about gluttony ever before. So this was good for me, I think. And so hopefully you found some usefulness out of it. We didn't talk at all about becoming a Christian, encouraging those that are here to become a Christian. But as we bring the lesson to a close, we wouldn't want to end without giving you that opportunity. And so you're here tonight, and you understand that you've not been right with God. We said in the beginning, any sin that separates us from God is a deadly one. And we've all sinned. That's a truth that the Bible reveals. But God sent a Savior, His Son Jesus, and we've got the ability to obey the gospel by hearing the Word of God, believing it, repenting of our sins, confessing our faith in Jesus as the Son of God, and being baptized, and we can have our sins washed away. That's a wonderful thing. If you're here tonight and maybe you have fallen back into the world, been pulled away from God. Maybe your appetite, what we talked about tonight. Maybe not just food, but anything. If you've lacked self-control and you've gotten away from God, why don't you come back to Him? And we'd be glad to pray for you and with you if that's your desire. If you have a need in any way, come forward while we stand and while we sing.